God is dead. Nietzsche wrote these 3 words and the world called it an attack on everything sacred. Churches condemned it. Philosophers argued over it for a century. Most people still hear it as the most godless thing ever put on paper. But what if they all miss the point entirely? Here is what almost no one will tell you. Seeking God outside yourself works against your own spiritual growth. The soul doesn't live in a building, in a scripture, or in someone else's already concluded belief. Nietzsche didn't erase the sacred. He moved it from external doctrine into the direct, unmediated experience of your own nature. And the abyss he described wasn't a warning about darkness. It was an invitation to see what you've been carrying without ever looking at it directly. As we dive deeper, you will understand why looking into that abyss isn't a descent into madness. It's the beginning of wholeness. Before we dive in, if this kind of content resonates with you, come find me at luminaryflow.com. There's a free gift waiting for you. You'll find the link in the top comment below. Now let's get back into it. Most people read Nietzsche as an atheist who tore God down and left nothing in his place. That reading is lazy and it misses the actual move he was making. He wasn't fighting God, he was fighting doctrine. Because doctrine functions as a buffer. It places a layer of inherited conclusion between you and the raw, direct contact with your own nature. He praised Buddhism for its practical clarity. He admired what he called the free spirit of Jesus. Someone so grounded in direct experience that no formula could contain him. What Nietzsche rejected was anything that prevented that contact. Inherited certainty that closed the door before the individual had ever truly searched. His understanding of life had a mystical charge to it. He believed intelligence had to run alongside instinct, another word for what deeper traditions call intuition. And he believed in what he called eternal return, that everything happening now will happen again, infinitely. That isn't a cosmological claim, it's a spiritual test. It asks whether you can love your life exactly as it is, not the edited version, not after the healing, not once things improve, as it is here and now, completely with everything it contains. The test is the hidden engine of Nietzsche's 3 states metamorphosis. The first stage is the camel. The camel is the spirit that kneels and says, "Load me." It takes on the full weight of the culture's accumulated rules, traditions, and moral conclusions. Thousands of years of other people's "thou shalt," without once asking whether any of it actually matters. The load feels like meaning because it's the only weight the camel has ever known. The camel is the spirit in the act of kneeling. But the personality is the structure that stays bent. Over time, the act of carrying becomes the identity itself, not a spirit with a burden, but a self built entirely around the shape of the load. Now, what is the camel carrying? Nietzsche gave it a name. He called it the dragon. The dragon is the great "thou shalt." Every scale on its body is a rule, a value, a moral commandment written over thousands of years and handed down as absolute truth. Honor thy tradition. Obey the institution. This is who you are. This is what life means. The dragon doesn't ask whether you agree, it simply declares and expects the camel to kneel. The second stage is the lion. The lion is the spirit that has looked at the dragon and decided, no. Not I will obey differently, not I will carry the weight more gracefully, just no. That is the holy no. The lion fights the dragon and by defeating it wins the right to do something the camel never had. Its own I will. Not a borrowed will dressed up as freedom, its own will. The spirit stops taking orders from something it never chose and begins to rule itself. The lion can't build anything new yet. It hasn't found its own values, only its refusal. But that refusal is the whole point at this stage. It clears the ground. It creates the space that new creation will eventually need. The third stage is the child. And Nietzsche placed the child last, because the child isn't naivety, it's what arrives after the dragon has been defeated and the lion has done its work. The camel carried everything without question. The lion refused it all. The child stands in the open space left behind and says, yes, a holy yes. Not to the dragon's borrowed commandments, but to life itself, on its own terms, created from within. That yes is what spiritual traditions across every era have called the soul awakening. Nietzsche used different words, but the territory was the same. To understand what stands at that threshold, you have to understand what the abyss actually is, because it isn't what anyone taught you. The line gets quoted as a warning. Gaze too long and something dark gazes back. That reading has buried what Nietzsche was actually pointing at for over a century, and it's worth setting straight. The abyss isn't darkness. It's the unexamined territory of your own nature that the personality was built to avoid. Everything that didn't fit the dragon's load, every part of yourself that the thou shalt declared unacceptable, got pushed down and left there. It's not a void, not a threat. It's the reservoir of what was never allowed to be seen. What Nietzsche says about the abyss gazes back. He isn't describing something coming for you from the dark. He's describing what happens when the personality's accumulated weight begins to lift. Then the soul, the true self, becomes visible underneath it. You can't release what you haven't seen. The dragon provided the weight from outside, but the personality organized itself around that weight until the two became indistinguishable. The external, thou shalt, and the internal, this is who I am, merged into one structure. From inside that structure, the weight isn't visible as weight, it's just you. But the personality only survives as long as it isn't being watched. The moment you look directly at its structure, it begins to dissolve. This is what Nietzsche did. What looked like nihilism to everyone watching was the personality becoming visible to the self. Inherited morality, inherited purpose, inherited God. The entire structure of borrowed life coming into plain view at once. He wasn't destroying meaning. He He was watching the second-hand version dissolve, so something lived from within could replace it. And this is where the advanced seeker hits a trap. The beginner doesn't. The beginner carries obvious weight, the borrowed religion, the inherited shame, the family story. That weight isn't subtle, but the seeker who has been working for years, their danger is the sacred ego, the personality hiding behind spiritual achievement, wearing detachment as armor, using non-dual vocabulary as a wall between itself and the raw fact of being alive. That is still the abyss, harder to see because it looks like progress. When the abyss gazes back, nothing is coming for you. That gaze is the soul recognizing the personality for what it is, temporary, accumulated, real in its own way, but not the final word on what you are. The recognition isn't comfortable, but here's what that discomfort actually is and what it means for everything that comes next. The practice is this: when something in you reacts bigger than the moment calls for, pause and observe the reaction instead of being swept up in it. Don't explain it. Don't trace it back to childhood. Don't reframe it into something more manageable. Just sit back slightly and notice it, the heat of it, the shape of it, as a thing that's happening, not as something you are. The personality has always depended on no one inside watching. The moment you watch, the spell breaks. Nietzsche watched. He watched without any tradition to guide him, without a teacher who stood where he was standing, without any knowledge structure to hold what his clarity kept finding. And this is where the story turns, because what happened next isn't a proof that the abyss destroys. It points to something else entirely. January 1889, Turin. Nietzsche collapses in the street and never recovers. What the clinical picture couldn't see at the time was simple. He had crossed into territory that required a container, and he had none. No grounding practice, no container, no structure that could hold what his clarity kept finding. The current he touched had nowhere to go. Here is what actually happened. The camel, the lion, the child. That metamorphosis isn't just a metaphor, it's an energetic process. When the personality begins to dissolve, the energy that was locked inside all that accumulated structure releases. Everything the camel carried, centuries of inherited conclusion, the sacred ego's spiritual pride, the lion's burning refusal, all of it was stored energy. When it moves with force. The mystics knew this. Every tradition that worked at this level knew it required a container, a form, a practice, a guided passage, a method to ground the current, a way of holding the dissolution steady while the personality comes apart. Not because the seeker is fragile, because what moves through a dissolving personality isn't just a trickle. It's everything that was compressed into it, every suppressed force, every unfaced truth, every locked charge from decades of carrying the dragon's weight. All of it is released at once. Nietzsche had none of that to shield him. He had genius, but genius isn't a container. He had philosophical courage, but courage doesn't ground the current. No practice, no container, no structure capable of receiving what his inner honesty kept finding. Think of it this way. A wire carries current only up to what it was built for. Nietzsche's structure couldn't hold what he kept finding. The truth was real. The container wasn't ready. His sacred ego had dressed itself in the Übermensch and called that the destination. When the awareness that dissolves all structure arrived at full force, there was no practice to ground it, no vessel to hold the dissolution steady. The current had nowhere to go. The mystics who crossed the same threshold and came back intact did so because the container was ready before the crossing began. The truth they touched was the same. What differed was the preparation. Nietzsche's collapse wasn't evidence against the journey. It was a precise demonstration of how far he went, and of exactly what the crossing costs when no ground is underneath you. God is dead wasn't destruction for its own sake. It was clearing ground for new ideas. Nietzsche wasn't pulling the sacred out of the world. He was pointing out that religion had placed it out of reach, hung it outside, locked behind doctrines that asked you to look everywhere except inward. The divine was never absent. It was waiting behind the one door no borrowed belief can open for you. The abyss is that door. It doesn't arrive as a dramatic event. It arrives in the moments when your reaction runs hotter than the situation calls for, where the same pattern returns wearing a different face, when the "thou shalt" you thought you had dropped shows up again in a new costume. That is the personality surfacing. That is the abyss making itself known. And here's the thing. The personality doesn't disappear when you see it. It becomes known. The soul sees it clearly, without needing to fix it, without needing it to be different. And that seeing is enough. No effort, no transformation, no 10-step process needed. What is fully seen can no longer operate from the dark. It loses the grip it used to have when no one inside was watching. This is what Nietzsche was reaching for his entire life. He found the territory. He named it with more precision than many spiritual traditions ever managed under far more comfortable circumstances. And he stood in it alone, without a vessel, without a lineage, which is the one reason the crossing cost him everything. You don't have to cross unprepared. The container exists, whatever form it takes for you. Practice, grounding, a structure that can hold the weight of what comes through. It exists. And the abyss? It has already found you. It found you the moment something in you recognized what was being said here. The only move left is to look at what's there without flinching and let the soul see what the personality has been carrying all this time. If this resonated with you, come find me at luminaryflow.com. There's a free gift waiting for you there, and you'll also receive my newsletter with thoughts and inspiration behind each video. You'll find the link in the top comment below.